Back in September, 193 member states have voted and agreed upon, I think, the most ambitious global development agenda in our history, which is called the Sustainable Development Goals. And it gave us a responsibility to act on 17 goals and 169 targets. Now, I'm in the business of partnerships. I've been trying to bring private sector partners and high net worth individuals to the UN to help member states, as well as our humanitarian agencies, to be more strategic and collaborative in doing good. And so today we have a panel of private sector actors, as well as a foundation representative. And I want to start in perhaps introducing you to our audience, and then I'll move forward into a larger context. We have Raul Fernandez, who is Vice Chairman of Monumental Sports and Entertainment. We have Nicole Gardner, who is a VP of Global Leaders at IBM. Stephen Chase, who is the VP of Insights Research and Analytics at Marriott. Dave Wilcox, who's not with us, I believe. And Marcus McGrew, who is the Director of Grants Management at the Kresge Foundation. Welcome. Could you just give us a little bit of insights about your position in each of these companies, and then we can move forward. I'll just give you some context about the discussion. Yes.
Terrific. So Monumental Sports and Entertainment is housed right down the street at Verizon Center. We own the Washington Capitals, Washington Wizards, Washington Mystics, and a new Arena Football League team that is yet to be named that we announced this week. We do about 290 events a year down the street. So it's a lot of events. In the last 75 days, we've done 90 events because of the ACC tournament. So clearly, we're high touch. We're high touch with people. We're intense content, basketball, hockey, concerts, and other events. And we're big believers and big users of data. We use it at the team level. So at the team level, we've got an ability to know how far John Wall ran last night in the game. So we literally know the number of miles and steps that he took. But more importantly, we know the intensity. So acceleration, deceleration. So it's not just how long he played, but it's the rapid, burst, and then the rapid stop. And all that data is taken in every night. Assistant coaches look at it. The next morning, depending on when we play and what the break is in between, they'll tell the head coach, hey, lighten up on John. John had a really rough night. He's had 2 rough nights in a row. Let's pull back a little bit on it. But we're just at the beginning of big data in sports. And I'm not even going to touch on the consumer side of it in terms of how we can target better customers and expand our ticketing base. But I think one of the most interesting things for me, and I'd love to follow up with you, is how sensors are becoming very small and very affordable. This is a hydration sensor. In sports and in medicine, for certain illnesses, by the time you know you're dehydrated, it's too late. You're cramped up, your potassium and sodium levels are at a high that require time and water and rest to get down. That's not very useful in sports because you've got an athlete that's got to get back in the game. So you've all seen people on the side stretching, getting extra bottles of hydration put into them. This thing costs about $12, and it's topical. So you put it on your arm. You put an app on top of it, and it can literally give you an accurate hydration method data point. This will ultimately be in our jerseys, along with other devices in our jerseys, other sensors that will give us a ton of data. So we're really at the beginning in terms of sports and optimization and performance of what I think is an incredible revolution. If you step back and think about it, you know more about your car than you do about your body. And some of us wear these things called Fitbits, which give us, how far we've walked, our heart rate, how much we've slept. But it's a fraction of what you should know about yourself. And I think from a business standpoint, there's a huge opportunity there about who owns the knowledge about yourself, and probably more importantly, that knowledge in the context of other 49-year-olds that are like me around the world. And that's what companies like Under Armour and Fitbit and others are trying to attack because they see a huge opening there. So sorry for that long.
No. Thank you, Raul. Thank you for this insight. Nicole?
Good morning. Thank
morning.
you, Annette. Good morning, everyone. I'm Nicole Gardner. I am the Vice President for Federal Health Care for IBM Services Business. And a few years ago, our CEO, Ginny Rometty, gave a talk at the Council of Foreign Relations, and she talked about data being the currency of the future. And we've really, big data and analytics, and most of you have probably heard about Watson, it's in our DNA. I was interested in the comment from our friend from the European Union who talked about expectation management, and I think that's a really important concept. It's very concrete for us. We've been working on these areas for many, many years, and I just thought I would highlight two programs that we're working on right now under the theme of Data for Good. One of them is in the area of healthcare in terms of diagnostics. And the difficulty these days of being a doctor or a clinician and trying to absorb all of the drug testing, clinical trials, and treatment outcomes that are found all over the world for different cancers and different illnesses. 13,000 people die each year in the US from glioblastoma, brain cancer, one of the most rapidly increasing instances and really virulent, they're all virulent, but this one's particularly horrible, in the United States. And so we're working with the New York Genomics Center to understand and map patterns from brain cancer samples, tumor samples, to understand the specific underlying DNA of that tumor and then mapping it to clinical trials, outcomes from all over the world to design very personalized treatments. This is a very exciting area for brain cancer patients, but also for cancer across the board. If we can accelerate and understand how to tailor treatments based on a person's specific instance and situation, we expect that the outcomes are going to be much better. So we're hoping, of course, these sorts of initiatives, you measure them in decades, and it takes a long time to actually see the results. But we're very excited about this one. We're also working with Sloan Kettering and MD Anderson in other areas of oncology. So that is a very exciting area. Another one I want to highlight is a project we call Project Lucy, which is a $100 million investment in Africa. A couple of data points about Africa. A third of the sub-Saharan African population is 10 to 24 years old. And by 2025, the workforce in that area of the world will be 440 million people. It will be the largest workforce in the world. In that context, there's only one doctor for every 2,000 people, and they have 20% of the world's disease burden. 50% of African children are going to grow up to their adult years without being able to read, write, or perform any basic math. Nearly 1/3 of Kenya's GDP is transferred through electronic payments, which is an interesting paradox between those two situations. And 345 million people in Africa don't have access to safe water. So we've opened an office in Nairobi, and we are working with scientists, with private sector partnerships, with government entities, with NGOs, to try to solve some of the continent's biggest problems. And so a few of the projects that are very concrete center around trying to translate the Western attitudes that we bring into development and aid and help, like very large-scale irrigation programs, very big equipment, into places where localized, it's really about small-scale farming. There are very limited access to energy for these big equipments, and as I said, the payment methods are involved in a flourishing mobile community, which break a lot of the models that we're expecting. So some of the projects that we're working on are around personalized education, really understanding how to understand the current situation and trying to personalize so that the children can, and we all know what the impact of education is on development, that's well documented. Helping Watson to have apps that are available to community health workers who are out in the bush and in the field to try to bring real data and ability to diagnose so that they can get to help that is appropriate and find the places to get treatment. Digital aquifers to map and analyze the status of underground water to try to preemptively deal with drought situations and water table droppings before it becomes a starvation and a food crisis. And also a program with UNICEF to help to address both economic and social and health problems and flagging urgent situations based on pattern recognition that we know can develop and getting early intervention and prevention. So those are some of the real projects under the category of data for good. We're excited about all of these and looking forward to sharing and hearing all of the conversations that will happen today. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. Thank you. Marcus?
Good morning, and many thanks to George and Ideagen for having the Kresge Foundation represented here today. It's a pleasure. So the Kresge Foundation, for those of you who are not familiar with it, is a national private foundation with $3.6 billion in assets. We're located in Troy, Michigan, just outside of Detroit, and our mission is to help expand opportunities for low-income people in America's cities. We've been around since 1924, and we work through 6 narrowly defined program areas: arts and culture, community development in Detroit, higher education in the US and South Africa. We also fund the environment, helping to sustain and build resilient communities, as well as health and human services. We also have 2 practices: social investments, program-related investments that take the form of loans, equity investments, as well as loan guarantees, and American cities. We focus in several cities across the states, but we have a particular interest in what's happening in Detroit, Memphis, and New Orleans. And so these programs and practices represent the inflection points where we think we can make a real difference in the world. You know, we started out more than, almost 90 years ago and became really, really well known for our signature Capital Challenge Grant program. We challenged organizations to build their capacity, and we were very, very rigorous about using data to help organizations grow and expand their capacity. Since that time, we moved to these 6 narrowly defined programs in 2 practice areas, and we are very, very focused on how we can leverage data to really show where the deepest disparities live. If we are going to help expand opportunities for low-income people in America's cities, we can leverage data in a very masterful way to identify where those deep disparities live. We also think that leveraging data can, allow us to highlight high-performing organizations with a proven track record of making a difference in the lives of those who are most vulnerable in our communities. And in addition to that, really shed light on exemplary practices that work for people living in communities that are looking for a way to higher ground. One of the most exciting things about how we're leveraging data is really around accelerating learning and sharing within the sector. As you may know, philanthropy is really built on very strong relationships. And so what excites me about the use of data is using data to challenge our assumptions. Really a lot of smart people in our field, as is the case in yours, but we really like using data to challenge our assumptions, to challenge our intuition, our experiences, and really shed light on the relationships that do not exist. There's a tendency in philanthropy to fund organizations over and over because of their great work, but also because of the relationships that we've built over decades. But I think as we focus more intently on the use of data in our work, it is going to lead us to where the deepest disparities live and to the organizations, whether known or unknown, are making a real difference in those communities. And lastly, I would just say that, you know, philanthropy is all about making a difference. We are working in partnership with not just other private foundations, nonprofit organizations, but also with businesses to help improve the life outcomes for the most vulnerable among us. And it's no easy task. Whenever you're trying to address society's most vexing ills, it is going to take very strong partnership. And key to that is our use of data.
Thank you, Marcus. And finally, Stephen.
Hi, I lead a consumer insight organization at Marriott International, which encompasses behavioral analytics, customer satisfaction surveys, as well as market research. And I was talking with George earlier, and he said, hey, could you give me an idea around, provide an idea around the value of knocking down data silos, and also, what is it you don't know? So I'm going to provide an example of the value and perhaps first the resistance to breaking down data silos, the value of breaking them down, and then what is it that, you know, is really hard to know that I think hopefully is relevant to y'all. In terms of the resistance, not everybody wants to share data simply because knowledge is power and sharing data is ceding power. And no one will say that, but that is a natural human characteristic. And the way we broke down a data silo is that we put these three disparate organizations into the same organization and got analysts with different points of view and different methodologies in the same group. So customer satisfaction, behavioral analytics, and the market research just hadn't lived in the same place. Now, what's the value of that? We used to do a brand health survey, and it was a survey. We used to ask customers what they thought, and often that would lead to a conclusion that would be a single number. You know, so Marriott was this, Hilton was that, Hyatt was that. And there's a couple problems with that. The first is the truth is not really best represented by a number. And when I say truth, I take that seriously and lightly because we'll never know the truth. The best we can do is to approximate it the best we can. But it's not best represented through a number. It's actually best represented through a story. And a story is not a single data point. And numbers are also not persuasive. Stories are persuasive. You know, so how do you get to a story? Well, we took the survey data and we put it in the context of guest satisfaction data, and we took it in the context of how many hotels we have in the 10 countries where we did the survey, and we put it in the context of the financial results that those properties had at a brand level, as well as the behavior of the consumers in a brand level. And we found some things that we'd never found before, and we created an executive summary that didn't really have any numbers in it. It had the synthesis of all these different data sources. And among the things that we found is if you run a brand, you want to think that it's all about marketing, or you want to think about all about advertising. We actually quantified the value of scale, how many hotels you had in the market, rather than the value of only simply the brand impression. We also quantified the value of the lodging industry is lumpy. I mean, it's not like every hotel is in every store. It's very different than retail. So the value of certain properties in marquee locations, or the quality of those properties. And I could go on a little bit more, but I'll leave it at that. That was a key difference between how we done it in the past and how we did it in currently. And that made it all the way to the CEO and the chairman. And he asked the presidents of the various continents. They asked the presidents of the various continents, oh, okay, take action on this. So the last bit, I mean, we know a lot, but we don't know more than we know, and it will always be that. We were talking earlier about behavioral analytics is hard, market research is hard. It's hard to get that right. But there are things that are even harder, and those three things are what customers think and won't say, hard to get at that, what customers think and have yet to admit to themselves, which is even harder, and beyond that, what customers do in situations they've never experienced before. you know, and because in a larger sense, and the thought I'd like to leave you with is, no one knows whether they're going to be a hero until that specific opportunity presents itself. And that plays itself out every day in ways great and small. And that becomes a very difficult consumer insight challenge.
Thank you all. I just want to, we have 5 minutes, I think, remaining, and I just want to talk a little bit about, obviously, all of you are collecting data and doing good. But at the UN, we're challenged a little bit because the sharing of data is where it just doesn't trickle down, right? And so ultimately, when we look at outcomes, and we just came out of the Millennium Development Goals, we're now going into 15 years of Sustainable Development Goals, which is everybody's agenda. We're just not moving the numbers fast enough. Can you speak to that a little bit? I mean, I know Stephen touched a little bit on the data sharing, but ultimately, that's the bottleneck, right? That's where it hurts. And so particularly in emerging economies where data collecting is very, very difficult. But your companies are in some of these markets, and yet, the public sector is struggling, and certainly at the UN we're struggling to collect that data. Can you talk a little bit about that and see how we can think about, or perhaps rethink how to best leverage what I called the new and renewable natural resources, that is big data. Nicole.
Well, I think that is the next big grand challenge with data. So our colleague from Microsoft talked about these sensors and data in motion and data at rest. So now we know that we have data and we can see it everywhere, and it's becoming huge. It's almost like its own entity, an organism. It grows and grows and grows. It doesn't really drive huge value until it's shared, and when you can actually use it to drive insight. And I think some of the big barriers, believe it or not, as is true with any large transformation in terms of thinking, it's cultural. So you have data ownership issues, you have data governance issues, you have security and privacy issues. And what you need is, it's interesting, the organizational construct that Stefan mentioned is the ability to convene coalitions of stakeholders who talk about governance preemptively and proactively and agree on a common set of goals and outcomes that they can drive towards, and thereby negotiate the compromises they will have to make in order to share data and to be able to do that in a more seamless and less costly way. And I think that's the starting point, is the recognition that the technology's there. It's not about that. It's about understanding all of the pre-existing attitudes and ideas about what giving up power and what giving up ownership and maybe even some privacy mean to the entities.
That's correct, yeah. Marcus, you wanted to add to that?
Sure, I would add that in philanthropy, we really need better efforts to share data to help accelerate learning. It's all about accelerating learning for us. And in our world, we get really excited when partner organizations, grantees, share their successes, but we need to be just as excited when they share what didn't work so well. So that is our vantage point of more open data to accelerate learning for the sector to address the societal ills that we're working to combat.
Thank you. Anyone? Stephen?
Yeah, I'd like to address the issue of leadership, and I think that that's absolutely very critical to this, rather than just addressing only the data, in the sense that humans aren't rational, we rationalize. And often we will look for the data, and we will look for the analysis that reinforces our own existing point of view. And in order to get beyond that requires a group or an individual who is really willing to it's easy to challenge assumptions, but we'd all rather challenge somebody else's assumptions and not our own. It really requires a leader who is willing to challenge himself or herself and challenge the group that are responsible for the data and the analysis in order to really make any progress. And that is very, very difficult.
That's right. It's very rare. It's very difficult. Well, I think our time is up. What I would close by saying is that I think the UN is certainly a platform. You know, the Secretary General launched a few years ago a new initiative called UN Global Pulse, which is exactly that. It's a working group. It's an innovation lab that really welcomes all data collector to really come together and find ways to actually collaborate and share data. So I encourage you to go to the website and learn about UN Global Pulse and perhaps participate and call. Thank you so much. I hope we've advanced the conversation, and thank you to my panelists.